All right. Thanks for joining me, Stuart. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Pleasure. No, glad to be with you today.
Wonderful. So I want to start with uh, the fact that you're a leader in public affairs, public relations. You're based in the UK, but you're not just a practitioner. You're part of industry groups like Public Affairs Board and Chartered Institute of Public Affairs or Public Relations, uh, which kind of for our American listeners are akin to Public Affairs Council and maybe Public Relations Society of America. Why do you engage in those industry groups? Uh, it seems like you train others, you give back. What's the value proposition
Thank you.
to
Well,
that?
it's always very pleasing to be described in such wonderful terms, and that is very kind of you. I mean, so I've been sort of doing the practitioner side for 25 years, something along those sort of lines, and it's across public affairs in its sort of broadest range of political engagement, crisis comms, reputation management, particularly in recent years. But one of the things which I've always tried to do, which you rightly identify, is to try and sort of it sounds a bit facetious to say sort of give back to the industry, but certainly I've always enjoyed writing and talking about the issues that we all have to deal with in those settings. I think it sort of comes from because of my route into public affairs and political communications was a little different from some. I did a PhD in political science at the University of Aberdeen, where I did my degree as well, and it was sort of comparative politics, particularly the Labour Party here in the UK, French Socialist France, obviously, and the SAP in Sweden, but a little bit of a trawl around some of the other Western European countries, little dabble in the US as well, but nothing too much with the Democrats and things. But and that sort of got my thirst, if you like, for continuing to write. So I've always enjoyed the writing, and then the training sort of came out of that, really. So with the CIPR and the PRCA, particularly, I do a for the PRCA do a diploma in public affairs management, and there's some other shorter courses as well. But yeah, it's me sort of, I don't know, sharing a bit of best practice, some thoughts, some ideas, um, helping as well. In again, without wishing to sound too sort of pompous about the whole thing, but one of the things which I am quite passionate about is just getting more people into doing what we do. From a diverse range of backgrounds, socially, economically, educationally, whole range. And again, if that's one way that I can do that, then I feel that I'm sort of playing a little part in that.
What's the value of getting that diverse group of people involved in the business?
I think I mean, it's not just about public affairs, is it? In that case, I think it's across the piece, you just get different challenges. You get better thinking. You get challenged in a way that otherwise, if we all think and do exactly the same things all the time because we all look and sound and exactly the same, then nothing shifts. And that challenge, whether it's in the boardroom, whether it's in the classroom, whether it's in what we do, just keeps you fresh, keeps you challenged, keeps you alive, gets the thinking, gets the thought processes different perspectives. So, well, have you thought about this or that, or and particularly for younger groups as well. Look, I'm not going to claim to be the absolute expert on all the various channels that we have to use to engage and communicate with audiences, not just politicians, but across the piece. So I might have a sort of an idea about what I want to say, but others can help me say it much more effectively because they understand those channels much better than I do. So being selfish, I find it really useful as well.
Sounds reasonable. Uh, I know I've had mentors and people who I've respected throughout my career that have been really big in formulating who I am today. Do you have a one mentor or a boss or someone that kind of was a big part of your success?
Yeah, I mean, I've had different people at sort of different stages of my career. So when I think back to my PhD and the more academic side of things, there was a guy called Byron Criddle, who sadly passed a couple of years ago as a result of COVID. Um, but he was a challenge to me. One of these sort of larger than life personalities, knew lots about the Labour Party and the French Socialists and politics in the UK, sort of historically as well. Was always full of good stories, but was quite challenging, and and not least, he also got my style of writing much more, polished. Probably one word. I'm not sure he would describe it like that anyway, but polished than it would have been. But then, as I've gone through and had jobs, I've had, um, Joe Bryce and Jonathan Hopkins from my sort of first role at Roland, which was part of Saatchi and Saatchi at the time, which is where I sort of started my professional career. Lord Clement Jones at DLA Piper. I went on to a global law firm. I worked with him there, and a friend as well from there, Kevin Craig, who runs his own public affairs consultancy, very successful. So all different people at different times, I think, have really helped me and have really been there to give advice. So again, another sort of person that I met at work, but he's becomes a friend, Jackie Nixon, brilliant at sort of providing me with advice and thoughts about how I could shape my career and directions. And look, I've relied on all of those people and more, and huge amounts more, I hasten to add, throughout that. So I think rather than looking at one person, I've had different people at different points in my career, all of whom have been very generous with their time, and I wouldn't got to where I am without their help and support.
I wonder if young people today kind of see the world in that way and have the expectation that they are going to have someone help them along in their career. It seems to me when I talk to young people, they don't think that they don't they think it's hard for them to ask for advice. It's hard for them to think that someone's going to be there for them in that way, that it's almost like a burden. To me, I mean, I love those interactions. I love having
Absolutely.
conversations with someone. I don't even care if you're young. You could be 10 years older than me. If you're on a path somewhere and you want advice, I love that moment where I get to offer that advice and help someone along that path. Do you find people are kind of open to advice or seeking out advice, or how do you find that
Well, I
scenario
think there's a
today?
range. Absolutely. I mean, I'm fortunate enough to do some mentoring with a couple of organisations. One, University of Aberdeen, I still do some mentoring with through my connection that remains there. There's an organisation here in the UK called I Have a Voice, which helps people into public affairs, and one or two people that have approached me over the years just to sort of talk through. So sometimes it can be sort of proactive, and people just think, okay, look, I see or others as well, Stuart's profile and what he writes about, and what he does in the work setting, and they reach out. Others, you're right. Others, you maybe have to sort of you know be a bit more proactive with yourself sometimes as well, because everybody is different, and not everybody feels comfortable. They might think, oh, he's too busy, or he's too well. Like, I suppose they could think you're a number of things, really, couldn't they? I mean, maybe some less pleasant than others, but that can put people off. But simply, going up to somebody and saying, can we chat, can be a big deal. So I did some, again, a training session recently about to try and help civil servants here in the UK learn more about what we do in public affairs and political communications. As our good contacts that we need to talk to, but equally they can get something from the relationship in return as well, in putting into policy making and development. And there was a couple of people on the back of that session. Look, can we just have a bit of a chat? And yeah, great. I'm always I have made time, hopefully over the years, to do that. More than happy to chat with them and and talk through some of the challenges and future career paths that they were thinking about. And they were at slightly different stages in their career as well. But if somebody finds it useful, brilliant. If they don't, then well, look, they can always ignore me, can't they?
I think I heard that presentation you gave, if I'm not mistaken, and you talked about something in there that I thought was kind of interesting, and I wasn't sure what you meant by it. Normally, I kind of get things very quick, but you mentioned collecting insight in that as kind of one of the tenets, I think, of public affairs. And maybe it was a different talk, but you mentioned collecting insights formally and informally. And it was like a list of 6 things that were kind of essential to public successful campaign or public affairs effort. What did you mean by formally and informally?
Now, Adam, when you do this, you're automatically assuming that I remembered everything I've said in various points. Luckily, I think I do remember actually saying this. I think what I was trying to chat with is sort of when there are always, there are the sort of the formal channels that we use to collect the information that we gather. Now that might be proceedings in Parliament here, or across Capitol Hill there, in or state legislatures in the US, listening to debates, that sort of normal stuff of politics. And then there's the informal, which is the connections. It is the coffees, it's the chats, it's the going to
Mm.
meetings and round tables. So or information that maybe a colleague or a friend provide you with, and some new insight or some different sorts of thinking that you wouldn't have had exposure to if you'd have just been thinking quite narrowly, sorry, in those formal political channels. So I think it was my general plea to sort of just don't have blinkers on. Think about all the different ways that you gather information, and then gather that all together before you then start developing your strategy, and deciding to sort of crack on with a particular action, or tactic, or whatever however you're going to pull your work together. But just be broad in where that information comes from.
Totally makes sense. Um, so we rarely talk about our failures because it's just much more fun to talk about our successes. I tell the story all the time about how I was like very close to getting a contract with the LA Times to do their polling, or at least down the road, and I showed up late, like 20 minutes late to the meeting, and the guy I was supposed to meet with, was extremely dismissive, wouldn't even allow me up in the building. And it was a pretty good learning moment for me, because I was never doing that again. I was going to be on time. So and that could have been pretty significant in my career back then, to have an LA Times contract. So do you have any kind of boy, that was a screw up and I can tell everybody about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's you're right. We do tend to focus on the positives. We don't like to reflect on the fact that we're sometimes suboptimal in our performance or behaviour, or something like that. And it's funny you should talk about being late, because that is one of my pet paranoias, is being late for anything. So I think I get that from my father, and we'll turn up 3 days early for a meeting, because what happens if something goes wrong, or the transport systems collapse or something like that. So, but no, the one that when I was thinking about this earlier, and it was in a crisis situation, and the particular firm that I was working, or the client I was working for at the time, was run by a couple of sort of very successful businessmen, but it was effectively their brainchild. They had a real personal ownership of this particular company, not just in financial terms, but actually the amount of time and effort and commitment they'd made to it. And I was finding it extremely frustrating that I was sort of delivering what I thought was this insightful communications advice about how they should deal with this particular crisis, and mapping this over the course of a couple of weeks. This was a pretty big deal and would have some major implications for the future of the firm as a whole. And I was just getting very frustrated. I hope it didn't come across in the way that I behaved towards these, the client. I don't think it did, but there's always a slight worry. But I think what I'd failed to do was really understand the variety of pressures on them. The different stakeholders, not just the ones that I was talking about in the media and social media and political and those sorts of ones, but actually their funders, their customers, those sorts of people. And I hadn't reflected myself properly on those range of pressures that they were having to deal with, as well as listening to my obviously brilliant advice type thing. So in future, I just made sure I just tried to have a more of an understanding, a bit more empathy to the position that they were finding themselves in, not just focusing on that crisis. So I think I definitely learned something from that, and I in my mind count that as a failure on my part, which I had to address.
That's is meaningful. I think especially with people who are in positions of power or positions of wealth, we sometimes think, oh, they've got it all covered, and we're just helping navigate this thing. But they've got money, so don't worry about it. But no, there's real, they have the same
Absolutely.
pressures in life, so fascinating. All right, I want to start talking about switch a little bit to your what I'll call your tech stack and your management style and how you organize your professional life. I'm fascinated by it. I'm kind of always looking for that next thing, and that next thing could be a yellow legal pad. Quite frankly, it doesn't have to be some amazing app, but I want to get a sense of how you first collect news on a daily basis. What news sites do you go to? What apps do you use? How do you get that big picture insight of what's happening in the world or in the world of
Yeah,
your
yeah. No,
business?
that's it's a good point. And I know, Adam, you're entirely right. I love listening to what other people sort of say and use and
Yeah,
nick their. I mean, be inspired by their ideas. I'm not sure I'm going
yeah,
to make too much insight into this, but I'll try my best. I mean, so I always start my morning with the Politico London playbook, and I know Politico, global media outlet nowadays, but they do one for London, which effectively it's called London, but it does cover the whole of the UK, although Westminster much more clearly than much more focused than other parts of the UK system. Um, and that's a nice mix of, as it probably is for you guys, nice mix of sort of, what's driving the day, a bit of who's been to what parties, bit of what's coming up politically that day. So, a nice bit of sort of nice rounded sort of approach. So it's definitely that. Then I'd also point to the Times newspaper here. They do some good morning briefing emails, which I'll read. So that's how I sort of start it. And the Today program, so the BBC Today program on Radio Four. Still the 6 till sort of 9 in the morning. It's still the real driver of the day. So that starts my day, and then during the course of the day, BBC sites, Sky News, Twitter. Obviously, can't really avoid spending too much time flicking through people's tweets. Even nowadays, still do quite a lot of that. And then there's some more. I suppose we've got more diverse media channels now as well. So we've got Talk TV, GB News. Um, much more. I'm going to say overtly political in a way that again in the US is a bit more the norm. We haven't really had that here particularly. So those news channels, and they do some great discussion programs, particularly in the evenings. And then we've got Newsnight on the BBC at the end of the day. So you can literally go from the start of the day till the end and not escape sort of politics and news. So that's generally how I suppose the other thing which I've used a bit more recently in a bit more in recent months is Apple News as well, just because you can get a bit more of an international flavour, and particularly when you're looking at those international business um, issues, and again, particularly with a nod to the US, but other countries as well, but particularly with a nod to the US, you can see the germs of ideas, you can see discussions that are taking place overseas, particularly in the US, and they'll come across to the UK. So if I can be a bit more alert to those sorts, particularly business issues, then I'm in a better position to help my clients and just be a bit more aware of what's coming along rather than waiting until they arrive here.
That's super interesting to me. In the U.S., we often say I live in California, and I think there's often a suggestion that the politics and the innovations that happen in California kind of make their way throughout the rest of the country. There's some people would suggest that. So it's interesting to think that from a UK perspective that. For better or for worse, some of those activities and things that happen in the U.S. are going to kind of typically migrate, towards Europe.
Yeah, definitely something.
Um,
I mean, not all the
uh,
time, can't. But yeah, you can definitely see some of that. And
yeah,
look, I mean, California particular, but East Coast as well. But California, tech hub, etc. Look, they are the big companies that are global players. They're Twitter and Facebook and WhatsApp and etc. are all the ones that are here as well as with you, but they started with you. So.
yeah. Uh, okay, so then from a management perspective of you know, um, Are you all online? How do you keep your calendar, your notes? Is it sticky notes all over the place, or is it a white paper, or is it all Outlook or Gmail, or how do you kind of organize the bulk of the work you do, and also how do you communicate with your colleagues? Is it email? Are you slacking? What's the way you organize, and how do you
Yeah, look, I
communicate?
mean, so at the moment I run my own small consultancy, so there's not. I'm mainly keeping in contact with clients rather than
Right.
colleagues. But certainly in previous roles, that WhatsApp is just a great way. I mean, just as you hear him again, back to that point that you mentioned earlier about formal and informal, great way to just pick up bits of
Right.
information, share them around. Make sure that's provided to different clients across different perspectives rather than just being kept in my own head or something like that. So that's good. I must admit, I am a bit of a notepad person as well. So I'm a little old fashioned in liking, the notepad and jotting things down and ideas as they come in, both for client work, but also the writing and things like that. If I get some blog ideas or when I'm working on books, which I write as well, it tends to get written down. But equally, look, just the notes app on my iPhone, you get an idea, walking the dog, if I say the name of that will probably go off and then spoil the podcast. But hey, whatever, make a memo or
Yeah.
make a note, and then just jotting that as I go around. So just having the tech around me, either phone or good old fashioned hard copy. That as you think of things, as you have ideas, random or otherwise, that you can capture that in some way. So and then you've got your sort of more project management type ones. But to be honest with you, they tend to be the ones that the clients have. I don't have a particular favorite in that sense. I'll
Right.
go with whatever, whether that's Microsoft or whether it's all the other ones that are out there as well. I'll work with whatever their requirements are. And in a typical post COVID world, it's all been Zoom and Teams and all those sort of things anyway, isn't it? So that's just where we all work off nowadays. So
Yeah, on that, definitely. Here, of course, in my business, I mean, I used to travel, every week or two, and now we just don't, because we're doing stuff all over the country. But what percentage of your meetings are in person these days, or are you versus not? And
it's going up, definitely. I mean, and I think when I've chatted to other consultancies that I've been speaking to recently, there seems to be that general drift back. So when we were, I mean, not just about meetings, but being in the office, where we were sort of more, if you want to come back, that's okay. Then it was sort of, well, we'd much prefer you to work 2 days. Two became three. Three's becoming four. Really, and I think you see that certainly in this country in terms of the travel arrangements across rail services. That it's sort of if you look at some of the figures, I believe it's sort of back up to sort of a more 4 day. Friday still seem to be a don't bother type working in the office type day, but for the rest of them, across the whole of the UK, that feels a bit more like it. And equally, you see that in meetings. The request. So I do some training virtually, but equally, the demand for in person training, is up. Meetings people prefer, unless they're drawing massive teams around the country or internationally. Okay, that's perfectly understandable. But if it's possible that you can bring them all in and be part of that day in the office or a couple of days in the office, people prefer that. So I'm doing a talk tomorrow, funnily enough, at the Surrey Business School on engagement issues, which I was fortunate enough to be invited along to, and that's in person, so that's great. So people are coming in from different parts of the world, including the US, to be involved in this particular conference, which the business school has organised. It'd be nice to actually spend a day in the company of people, chatting about the things that we doubtless find interesting and enjoyable. Others may find it a bit dull, but we like it anyway.
Very nice. Okay, to wrap up, do you have a personal credo, or maybe it's just advice to others in the industry or in business? But is there some, like, something you live by and you think everybody
Yeah,
else should?
look, I don't claim that this is particularly innovative, in that sense. But I've always, and this is what I talk about in terms of when I'm training public affairs, but equally, when I've been fortunate enough to lead be involved in leading a couple of consultancies, it's being proactive. It's going out there and looking for the opportunities to engage or work or get, drive business, or even when I was, I remember my first couple of books. These things don't fall into your lap. You have to sort of go out there and seek them out. So I think it's about having some belief in yourself, but being a little bit pushy. You know, asking people for things. Again, it's probably back to your earlier point, Adam, again about people asking for help and support and things like that. I've never been too backwards in coming forward in helping for those things. But say whether it's looking for opportunities for the books or work or whatever, then that proactive, just don't wait for things to happen, because frankly, unless you're really fortunate, and some people are, these things don't fall into your lap. You really have to go out there and try and find them and then grab them.
Fantastic. Grateful for having the chance to chat. Thank you very much, Stuart.
Pleasure. Thanks for your time.